Okay, so we've got this article someone sent us, and
Yeah.
it's making some pretty bold claims,
Yes.
saying that Canada is ditching the U.S. for China when it comes to oil.
Mm.
It sounds a little dramatic, right?
It does make for a catchy headline, that's for sure.
It does. But we're going to dive into this today and see if this is really a huge geopolitical shift or just, maybe some savvy business moves.
Right.
So let's break it down.
Yeah.
The article starts off by pointing to this 10% tariff that the U.S. put on Canadian oil.
Right.
Can you just quickly explain what a tariff is and how that actually impacts things?
Sure. So a tariff is basically like a tax
Okay.
on imported goods.
Okay.
And in this case, it means that Canadian oil is going to be more expensive for U.S. buyers.
Right.
It's kind of like if the price of your favorite coffee suddenly went way up,
Yeah.
you'd probably start looking for a cheaper option, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
So the U.S. makes Canadian oil more expensive.
Right.
And then suddenly China is looking like a pretty good customer.
Yeah.
The article says that they're really thirsty for oil.
They are.
But how thirsty are we talking?
China uses a massive amount of oil every single day.
Okay.
Something like 14 million barrels.
Wow.
To put that into perspective, that's more than the entire European Union combined.
Wow.
They're the world's biggest oil importer, and their demand is only going to grow.
Okay, so that puts things in perspective. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing Canada's new Trans Mountain pipeline plays into this whole thing.
Definitely.
Okay.
That pipeline expansion means that Canada can export way more oil to the Pacific,
Okay.
which makes it much easier and cheaper to ship all that oil to Asia,
Including China.
especially China.
Okay, so the pipeline opens up this new avenue for Canadian oil
Right.
at the same time that the U.S. is making it more expensive to sell to them.
Exactly.
But the article goes even further. It says that this is a deliberate move by Canada, a sign that they're fed up with the U.S. and they want to get closer to China.
Right.
Is that really a fair way to look at it?
Well, it's certainly a good story
Hey.
to frame it as a breakup.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably a bit more complicated than that. While the U.S. might be seen as less reliable these days,
Yeah.
diversifying your customers is just a smart business move.
Right.
It's about managing your risk and making the most of your opportunities.
So you're saying it's more like good business sense,
Hmm.
not necessarily some big political statement.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. But if we're talking about diversifying customers,
Yeah.
wouldn't it make sense for Canada to be looking at other markets too, not just focusing on China?
Absolutely. And to understand why this is happening, we need to look at what's going on with Russia. They're facing all these sanctions right now.
Right.
And it's not just economic sanctions.
What
They're
else?
specifically targeted at their energy sector.
How do-
So it's making it harder for them to export oil and gas.
Right.
And that's created a gap in the global energy market.
Interesting.
And China needs to fill that gap.
They need to find new suppliers. So China needs oil. Canada needs buyers.
Yep,
And the Trans Mountain Pipeline makes that all possible.
it does.
But the article also brings up some risks
It does.
with this whole pivot towards China. Let's talk about those.
Okay.
The first one they mention is trusting China.
Yeah.
They talk about China's history of renegotiating trade deals to get what they want. It kind of makes it sound like they could end up calling the shots and using their economic power to influence Canada's policies.
Right.
Sounds a little scary.
It's definitely something that Canada needs to be thinking about.
Yeah.
All countries negotiate in their own interest, of course.
Right.
But China does have a reputation for playing hardball.
Okay.
But there are things that Canada can do to manage that risk.
Like what?
Well, having very clear terms in their agreements,
Okay.
making sure they're trading with lots of different countries, not just China,
Okay.
and maintaining good relationships with their other allies.
Okay.
Those are all important.
So it's about being smart about it and not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Meh.
But what about the environmental impact of all this?
Yeah.
Canada has made these commitments to cut their emissions,
Yeah.
and increasing oil exports doesn't really seem to fit with that.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
And this is where things get even more complicated.
Yeah.
How do you balance the economic benefits of selling oil with the need to address climate change?
Right.
There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
Some people argue that the money made from exporting oil can actually be used to invest in renewable energy.
Okay.
But others say that's just an excuse to keep doing things the way they've always been done.
So it sounds like Canada's in a tough spot.
Yeah, it is a tough balancing act,
And then there's the U.S.,
right?
kind of the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
The article suggests that they might retaliate. Are we talking full-on trade wars here?
Well, the U.S. has definitely used tariffs before to get what they want. But I don't think we'll see a complete breakdown of the energy market in North America.
Okay.
It's just too interconnected for that.
Right.
But this situation could definitely lead to more tension.
Yeah.
We could see more tariffs,
Right.
more trade barriers, or even political maneuvering by the U.S. to protect their own interests.
So basically, Canada has to weigh the potential benefits of this China-focused strategy
Yeah.
against some pretty serious risks.
Absolutely.
And all of this is happening while the world is trying to shift to renewable energy.
Right, we're in the middle of a huge energy transition.
Yeah.
And that adds a whole other layer of complexity to this situation.
It really does. So how does this potential increase in Canadian oil exports to China fit into that bigger picture?
That's a great question.
Is this like a short-term gain that could backfire in the long run?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
It's important for Canada to be thinking about the long-term consequences of their decisions.
Yeah, because the energy landscape is changing really fast.
It is.
And it's hard to predict what things will look like in 5 or 10 years.
Absolutely.
We need to dig a little deeper into those risks,
Yeah.
especially the environmental concerns. We touched on it earlier.
Yeah,
But it's worth talking about more.
it is.
Because increasing oil production and exports doesn't exactly seem like the most environmentally responsible thing to do.
No, it doesn't.
So how does Canada reconcile those two things?
Boosting oil exports while trying to tackle climate change?
Yeah,
That's a tough question.
it is.
It's a real balancing act.
Yeah.
And we'll unpack that more when we come back.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
All right.
Okay, so before we got sidetracked, we were talking about how boosting oil production and exports
Right.
doesn't really give off that eco-friendly vibe.
It doesn't, no.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that a lot of people are concerned about.
Especially given Canada's promise to reduce emissions.
Exactly.
So on the one hand, you've got this potential increase in Canadian oil going to China.
Yeah.
And on the other, you've got this global push for renewable energy.
Right.
How does that all fit together?
That's the big question. If Canada starts to rely too heavily on China as its main oil customer,
Yeah.
and then demand for oil drops off as the world switches to renewables, that could leave Canada in a tough spot.
It's kind of like betting everything on a horse that's about to lose the race.
Exactly. That's why it's so crucial for Canada to have a plan B.
Yeah.
They can't just focus on oil. They need to be investing in renewables,
Okay.
exploring other markets besides China, and developing new technologies.
It's about being prepared for the future,
Absolutely.
not just stuck in the past.
Exactly.
So it's not just about where the oil's going today.
Okay.
It's about what the whole energy landscape will look like years down the road.
That's right.
This is getting complicated.
It is a complex issue.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to those risks associated with this potential deal with China.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the environmental concerns.
Mm-hmm.
But the article also brought up some red flags about China's trade practices
Yeah, those are definitely worth considering.
and whether Canada could become too dependent on them.
Exactly.
It's that whole fear of China calling the shots, right?
It is. It's a legitimate concern.
Using their economic power to influence Canadian policy.
Right.
That's not a good situation to be in.
No, it's not.
So what can Canada do to protect themselves?
Well, they need to be really careful about the agreements they make with China.
Okay.
The terms need to be clear,
Right.
and they need to make sure they're not relying too much on China as a trading partner.
It's about maintaining their independence,
Absolutely.
not just chasing the money.
Right.
But we can't forget about the U.S.
No, we can't.
How are they going to react to all of this?
Well, I don't think we'll see a complete split between the U.S. and Canada when it comes to energy.
Okay.
They're just too interconnected,
Yeah.
but things could definitely get a little tense.
We can see more tariffs,
It's possible.
more trade barriers.
Yeah.
Maybe even some political maneuvering.
Right. The U.S. will want to protect its own interests.
Okay. So we've got potential environmental backlash, concerns about China's influence,
Right.
and the possibility of the U.S. pushing back.
It's a lot to juggle.
It really is.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that Canada needs to be worried about?
Well, there's always the unpredictable stuff,
Like what?
like a major conflict in the Middle East
Okay.
that disrupts oil supplies,
Right.
or a sudden breakthrough in renewable energy technology.
That would change everything.
It would. If oil suddenly became a lot less valuable,
Yeah.
that would have huge implications for Canada.
So Canada needs to be flexible.
Yeah, they need to be able to adapt.
They can't just have one plan.
Right. They need to have backup plans.
Plans B, C, and D.
Exactly. The more prepared they are,
Yeah.
the better they'll be able to handle whatever happens.
Okay, so we've talked about the economics,
Yeah.
the geopolitical risks, and the environmental concerns, but something you mentioned earlier really resonated with me.
Oh, yeah.
The human element.
Right.
I think we often forget about the people involved in all of this.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture.
Yeah.
But there are real people whose lives are affected by these decisions.
The workers in the oil industry.
Yeah.
The communities that depend on oil revenue.
Right.
The people who might be displaced by climate change.
Exactly. It's important to think about the social and ethical implications of all of this.
Not just the dollars and cents.
Right. It's about people's lives.
It's a good reminder that these aren't just abstract debates.
They're not.
They have real consequences for real people.
Absolutely.
And those consequences need to be part of the conversation.
They do.
Speaking of consequences, you mentioned energy security earlier.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
Energy security is all about having a reliable and affordable supply of energy to meet your needs.
Right.
And it's something that a lot of countries are worried about these days.
Especially with everything going on in the world.
Yeah, the global energy landscape is changing.
And it's not always stable.
That's right.
So how does this whole Canada-China situation play into that?
Good question.
Is diversifying customers good or bad for Canada's energy security?
It's tough to say. There are arguments on both sides. Some people say that it's good to have multiple customers because it reduces your reliance on any one country.
Makes sense.
But others worry that becoming too dependent on China could actually make Canada more vulnerable.
Especially since China has a different political system.
Exactly. And potentially different values.
It's a bit of a gamble.
It is. There are definitely risks involved.
It seems like there are no easy answers here.
There aren't. These are complicated issues.
They really are. But even without simple solutions, it's important to understand the complexities.
I agree.
We started with this attention-grabbing headline.
Yeah, about Canada ditching the U.S. for China.
Very dramatic narrative.
It was. But as we've seen...
It's a lot more nuanced than that.
It is. There's more to the story.
It's not just a black and white situation.
Right. There are a lot of gray areas.
There are economic factors, geopolitical factors, environmental factors.
And human factors.
Right. We can't forget about the people involved.
We can't.
So what's the bottom line?
The bottom line is that this is a complex situation. It is no easy answers.
But it's important to understand all of the different angles.
I think so.
And to think about the long-term consequences.
Absolutely.
Because the world is changing rapidly.
It is.
And we need to be prepared for the future.
We do.
So what do you think the future holds?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be a very rich man.
But you're the expert. Give us your best guess.
Okay, well, if I had a crystal ball, I'd be a very rich man. But I think one thing is for sure, the global energy landscape is going to keep changing really fast. The shift to renewables will speed up.
Right.
Geopolitical tensions will probably continue. And new technologies are going to pop up all the time.
So basically, buckle up.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride.
Okay. But how do you see Canada navigating all of this? I mean, they've got this potential deal with China.
Right.
But they've also committed to sustainability.
Yeah.
It seems like they're being pulled in opposite directions.
It's a tough balancing act for sure. But I actually think Canada is in a good position to do well in this new energy world.
Really?
Yeah. They have a lot of natural resources.
That's true.
A skilled workforce.
Yeah.
And they seem to genuinely care about sustainability.
Okay.
The key is going to be making smart decisions.
Right.
And being open to change.
Not being afraid to try new things.
Exactly.
But let's bring it back to the listener for a sec.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the big picture.
We have.
But what can the average person actually do to make a difference in all of this?
That's a great question, and I hear it a lot.
Yeah, it's easy to feel kind of helpless.
It is.
When you're talking about these huge global issues.
It can feel overwhelming.
Like, what can one person do?
Right. But the truth is, individual actions do matter.
What?
Especially when we all do them together.
So what can we do? Give us the pep talk.
Okay, well, first of all, be mindful of your own energy use.
Okay.
It sounds simple.
It does.
But it really makes a difference.
Like what?
Like turning off lights when you leave a room.
Okay.
Taking public transit or riding your bike instead of driving.
Right.
Choosing energy-efficient appliances. Yeah. Those little things add up.
Especially when everyone's doing it.
Exactly. It's about being aware of your energy footprint.
Yeah.
Not just using energy without thinking about where it comes from.
So be conscious of your choices.
Right. And talk to your friends and family about this stuff.
Okay.
The more we talk about it,
Yeah.
the more pressure we can put on governments and companies to make sustainable choices.
Right, because they work for us.
They do.
Not the other way around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So spread the word.
Yeah.
Start conversations.
Don't be afraid to get a little loud.
That's right. And don't forget about the power of your wallet.
What do you mean?
Support companies that are committed to renewable energy and sustainable practices.
Oh.
Choose products that are made with recycled materials or have a lower environmental impact.
So, like, vote with your dollars.
Exactly. Every dollar you spend is a vote for the kind of future you want.
I like that. Aligning your spending with your values.
Yeah, consumers have a lot of power.
They do.
When we demand sustainable products,
Yeah.
businesses will listen.
That's already happening.
It is.
Okay, so we've got reducing our own consumption, raising awareness,
Right.
and supporting responsible businesses.
Yeah.
What else can we do?
Yeah. Get involved in your community.
Okay.
Go to town hall meetings.
Right.
Write to your elected officials.
Yeah.
Volunteer for organizations that are working on environmental issues.
Make your voice heard.
Exactly. Hold your leaders accountable.
It's about taking action.
Yeah.
Not just sitting around waiting for someone else to fix things.
Yeah. Right. We all have a role to play.
Okay.
And lastly, and maybe most importantly, don't give up hope.
It's easy to get discouraged.
It is. There's a lot of bad news out there.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people doing amazing work.
Okay.
There's a growing movement of people who are dedicated to creating a more sustainable and just future.
So we're not alone in this.
You're not. We're all in this together.
And that gives me hope.
Me too. That's what makes me optimistic.
It's a collective effort.
It is. We all need to do our part.
Well said. I'm feeling a lot more empowered now. It's not about waiting for someone else to save us.
Right.
It's about taking action ourselves.
Exactly.
Both individually and collectively.
Exactly.
Both individually and collectively.
That's the spirit.
Awesome. Well, this was a really interesting conversation.
It was.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
This was a fascinating deep dive into a really complex issue.
It was.
And we hope you, the listener, found it engaging and thought-provoking too.
I hope so.
Remember, staying informed is important.
It is.
But taking action is crucial.
Yeah.
So go out there and make a difference.
Yes, make a difference.
And join us next time for another deep dive into a topic that matters.
Sounds good.